Good.
All righty. So let me just... All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our second in the series, Peace is Possible. It gives us great pleasure and privilege to be hosting Nada Majdalani, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Gidon Bromberg from Ecopeace, who are really running a phenomenal organization between partnerships between Israel, Palestinians, Palestine, and Jordanians in working out ecological solutions to some of the greatest challenges that there are in the Middle East. And I'm going to hand over to them shortly, but just before I do, I'd just like to hand over to Rabbi Jeffrey Kamens to acknowledgement of country. Rabbi Kamens, can I hand over to you? You've just muted yourself, Rabbi. Try again.
There we go. Here we are. We don't want anybody to be silenced in this conversation. That's what's important. Although, yes, I know the people that are out there, you're definitely on mute, but that doesn't mean you can't send in a question or a comment. I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank especially Rabbi Gad Krebs for organizing these and being so inclusive to bring in Emmanuel Synagogue and the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies so we can spread the word of what it means to have partnerships for peace. So it's wonderful to be with our partners in Ecopeace tonight. And we always want to acknowledge as well the significance of our presence in this land. I am speaking from Paddington area, eastern suburbs, Rabbi Krebs in the upper northern suburbs. And so we wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of these lands, where I am and where the Emmanuel Synagogue is in the land of the Gadigal clan of the Eora Nation, Kehilat Matsada, on the land of the Guringai Nation, neither of which people ever ceded sovereignty to their territory. So we do acknowledge over time that our European settlement somewhat intentionally, and also consequentially displaced those indigenous peoples from their land, disempowered them, and greatly destroyed their culture. So we acknowledge that to heal the wounds of the First Nations of this land, we must empower their voice within the Australian Constitution, as supported by the ECAJ and the Board of Deputies, to make sure that we learn the truth of our intertwined history, and reach treaties to share equitably the bounty of this land. So we acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, and we also pay respect to their ancestors, their leaders past, present, and emerging. And it's great to hear emerging leaders in the land of Israel and Palestine tonight.
Okay, thank you. Just before we hand over to our speakers, just a little bit of a brief intro. So Rabbi Kamens and myself had the privilege of meeting Gidon and seeing the work that Ecopeace does on a trip that we went in at the beginning of 2017. We really were able to see firsthand not only the destruction of what's happening from an ecological point of view and how damaging is what's happening over there, but the unbelievable collaboration and cooperation with people who are, let's say, from the political side, supposed to be enemies, but finding ways of making peace in an area where we have to find ways to collaborate. And Gidon was so eloquent. I hope a lot of you got to see the YouTube video that I sent around, which just talked a lot about what Ecopeace is doing. But enough from me. I'd like to hand over to Gidon and to Nada. Thank you so much. And questions will be, they're going to speak for a little bit, and then questions will be a little bit later.
So thank you so much, Rabbi Gad and Rabbi Kamens. Really grateful to you both for organizing this evening, and a very good evening to all of you in Australia. Here it's just after midday, so it's just in the afternoon. So we're not with our glass of wine as many of you might be yet. And we look forward to that maybe this evening. I also want to also thank the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies for their involvement. We've been delighted to be involved with their work in the past, and I also want to identify two people that perhaps are in the audience who are members of the International Advisory Committee of Ecopeace, Uri Wind from Sydney, and Michael Hershen, also originally from Melbourne, but now also in Sydney. So to the two of them, best wishes in particular. So I'm going to open with a little bit of history of how Ecopeace came about, and maybe an Australian connection, since I'm talking to an Australian audience. And then Nada's going to briefly talk about our bottom-up and top-down work, sort of how we actually work on the ground. And then we very much look forward to questions and utilize as much time as we can for a conversation with you all. As some of you know, and you can tell from my accent, I grew up in Australia, and I moved to Israel in '88, really wanting to contribute to peace building. I'd studied law at Monash University and thought human rights was going to be an approach of contributing to peace building in Israel and the region. And I fell across the environment. There was a new Israeli environmental organization called the Dam Tev V'Din that had just opened its doors, and they were looking for their first attorney. And I called them and said that I'd love to start volunteering 1 day a week to see whether my previous experience could be helpful. And I then had the opportunity to do a master's in international environmental law at American University in Washington, D.C., where at the time, 93, 94, the Oslo Accords were being negotiated, and the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan were negotiated and then signed. And the question that I asked in my research was whether peace was going to be good for the environment. Because at that time, there was a real euphoria. We were all certain that peace was breaking out. And the question was, well, was it going to leave us in a situation of sustainable development? Was peace going to see the rehabilitation of rivers and the Dead Sea and the protection of open spaces in our region, or was it going to lead to further demise? And my research concluded that environment wasn't on the political agenda of the peace process, not Israeli-Palestinian and not regional. And other than some basic lip service, there was, for example, 50,000 new hotel rooms being proposed to be built around the Dead Sea alone, without any consideration of carrying capacity. And therefore, Ecopeace was originally established with the idea of trying to get environmental issues on the peace agenda, to make sure that the peace that we're all certain was about to break out, or was breaking out, was going to be not only peace between people, but also peace with nature. And that was the original sort of raison d'etre of the organization. Quite quickly, however, we all saw with our, sort of with our own blood and tears, that peace wasn't breaking out. And there was, in fact, renewed violence and bloodshed, and following many horrible events that take place in the region, Ecopeace had to ask itself, is its programming still relevant? And the organization really had to reinvent itself. And over a period of several years, really until the outbreak of the Second Intifada, the organization came to understand that we were actually a model for peace. That the common concern over our shared environment. So the organization by that time, has a Palestinian director, a Jordanian director, myself as the Israeli director, offices in all three countries, close to 100 staff, all working together, trying to promote environmental protection. But we really reinvent ourselves and come to understand that the common concern over the environment is a very useful trigger to promote cooperation, to build trust, to improve the situation on the ground, and in that way, in fact, help create peace. And therefore the whole concept of environmental peace building became the new raison d'etre of Ecopeace, a concept that back in 2000 actually didn't exist. And we've been at the very start of what has become today a well-researched academic subject, taught also in various universities around the world. And we've been the trailblazers of this approach of how do we focus on our shared environment and the common concerns that our shared environment presents as a means to improve the reality on the ground, build trust, and advance peace. So that was sort of my introduction, and let me introduce Nada Majdalani, the Palestinian director of Ecopeace. She's speaking out of the Ramallah office of the organization, to contribute. Nada.
Thank you, Gidon. Thank you, Rabbi Krebs and Rabbi Jeffrey for hosting us. I'll take it from where exactly Gidon has finished. In terms of our programming, we are very much focused on a strategy that builds on engaging communities. So about 50 to 60% of our programming and strategy is focused on engaging grassroots level, including youth and women and farmers, and working closely with municipalities and community representatives. When it all started, our flagship program, as it's called, Good Water Neighbors, focused on communities that are living on shared water sheds that are crossing the borders, either Palestinian Israeli, Israeli Jordanian, or Jordanian Palestinian. We have over the past 17 years throughout our flagship program, Good Water Neighbors, engaged thousands of students, engaged hundreds of educators, and we engaged also community workers and community activists, precisely to basically build constituencies on shared environmental concerns, but also shared vision for solution. We have raised the voices of these communities. We've tried to give them the tools and equip them with the necessary methodologies to work out things together with their community representatives in order to basically raise the needs of these local communities, where these needs in terms of infrastructure or projects, etc., will have a dimension that is regional or transboundary to solve transboundary water or environmental issues. So over these past years, we have, with this methodology, been able to raise more than $500 million worth of infrastructure projects that contribute to resolving transboundary environmental issues. This in parallel goes with a large-scale educational program, which basically focuses on youth and teachers and students to have them learn the concepts of environment and water knows no boundaries. These concepts are done through instituting and emphasizing these messages on a local level, but later on bringing also Palestinian and Israeli youth and Jordanian youth to discuss these environmental issues, not on the concept of basically loving each other or just living together or becoming friends. The focus of these events and these activities are pretty much emphasizing the issues of working and collaborating together to solve and resolve shared concerns and problems which are environmental issues, and to learn the reality of the other in terms of their environmental reality and water reality, the discrepancies in terms of water services and access to appropriate infrastructure, etc., etc. In that sense, when we work with the communities, we also doubled or coupled our bottom-up approach with a top-down approach, which is very much focused on decision makers. We work closely with our three governments, each from his or her office. We work with stakeholders, decision makers, and influencing personnel in order to influence policy change and to enable, despite of the political differences and disputes, to at least look at what can be solved and what requires the work of each party to contribute and to take responsibility. In that sense, we try to establish at least a vision for the region, which is focused on the Jordan Valley. In 2015, we have produced a regional master plan for the development of the Jordan Valley in Palestine, in Jordan, and in Israel, based on the 1967 borders as a political boundaries concept. This master plan basically focused on establishing infrastructure projects that are necessary to improve the community's ability for resilience, their ability for sustainable development, both to support their economic development, but also to ensure that the unique environment and ecological system is in the Jordan Valley is preserved. Particularly that the Jordan Valley includes the Jordan River, which is holy to half of humanity for the three Abrahamic religions. In that sense, and stemming from the idea of the rehabilitation of the Jordan River, we came out with this regional master plan, and we've worked it together through our three offices with our three governments and through also engaging with our communities. In that sense, we now have the master plan endorsed by the Jordanian government. Also on the Palestinian side, there is a specialized committee that overlooks the implementation of the projects of these of the master plan, and also in Israel the master plan is approved. So in that sense, we try to engage all parties together in order to advance on what is of concern and interest of all. We focus in our work on amplifying the messages on a national level to the self-interest of the nation, but also with mutual gain and regional win-win situations for all. Another concept that we're also working on is the water energy nexus, which is based on an exchange of renewable energy produced massively in Jordan in exchange in return with desalinated water from the Mediterranean Sea, from Gaza, and from Israel, from the shores of the Mediterranean. And in that sense, we are aspiring to create interdependencies between the three countries, in which everyone can share one or another of the resources in a manner that it's a concept that addresses climate change mitigation and adaptation. All these efforts that we're trying to do is to basically put in the horizon of our stakeholders that climate change, environmental catastrophes, water issues, if they are not balanced, if they are not shared in an equitable way, if opportunities for development and growth are not met equally, the region that is more susceptible to these changes, to the climate change, to these environmental catastrophes, will be more susceptible because of the conflict. And the only way is to collaborate on these issues, not merely because of, again, wanting to see peace the next day. We know that this is a hard endeavor, and that it's a long way to work things out together. However, when working on water issues, environmental issues, we look at this as a low-hanging fruit because it's an interest for all parties to work on these together, and potentially a tool or a methodology that could build trust among the parties. We have plenty of activities, a lot of work that we're doing, lots of advocacy on the Palestinian, on the Jordanian, and the Israeli side, on against projects that could potentially damage our shared environment and water resources. We have adapted ourselves over the past 25 years to several changes on the political grounds. We have faced a lot of violence periods. We are currently facing one of the perhaps most difficult or politically difficult periods in terms of the attempts to annexation of parts of the West Bank to the State of Israel. All these turmoils, we have managed to adapt ourselves and our messaging and our strategy to keep going and to be able to institute ourselves on the ground and keep making a change step by step. Thank you.
So I just want to add one concrete program that I think to what Nada just spoke about before maybe we open it up to questions. There needs to be an understanding for those of you that know the region or haven't traveled in the region, that we're the most water scarce region on Earth. There is no other area in the planet that is as scarce of water than the Middle East, North Africa region. And therefore, water historically has been seen as an issue that will lead to conflict. And it's certainly been an issue that has led to competition, and the demise of the Jordan River that Nada mentioned before is very much due to the conflict with Israel taking half of the water that used to flow into the lower section of the Jordan River, and Syria and Jordan taking the other half and actually leaving next to nothing to the Palestinians. But instead of fresh water being in the river, this river, holy to half of humanity, has really been turned into a sewage canal with a great deal of sewage from all populations along its banks. And then the Dead Sea shrinking as a result of the Jordan River no longer flowing, and also industry in the south. The difference, though, from 93, 94, when the Oslo Accords and the Jordan-Israel Peace Treaty were being negotiated, to today, is that fresh water is not the only source of water available. And this is much due to Israel's leadership in the water economy and in the water sector, that there's an ability today to manufacture water, both by treating sewage and then reusing that for agriculture. And so about half of the food grown in Israel today comes from treated wastewater rather than using fresh water. And then desalination, and particularly reverse osmosis desalination. So Israel has 5 of the 10 largest desalination plants in the world, and 70% of the drinking water of Israel today is no longer coming from fresh water. It's coming from desalination plants in the Mediterranean. And that change, that ability to manufacture water at very reasonable prices, means that water is perhaps the low-hanging fruit in a possible advance of the peace process. That water as one of the 5 final status issues is the most solvable of the final status issues, yet has, despite our efforts to try to break a deal, a new deal, particularly between Israelis and Palestinians on the fair share of natural water, which doesn't take place. The Oslo Accords allocated fresh water resources for an interim period of basically 75% to Israel, only 25% to Palestine. But because we've never advanced from the interim period and we've never advanced into a full agreement, that is the allocation roughly still in place. Yet, despite the fact that water is no longer a zero-sum game, that fresh water can be fairly shared between our two peoples without anyone actually losing water, because today a reallocation of fresh water to the Palestinian benefit can easily be replaced with manufactured water to make sure that both Israelis and Palestinians have all of their water needs met. And sadly, what's sort of preventing this from going forward is a mindset that I think the Australian government too still supports, which is a paradigm of either the two sides move forward on everything, agree on Jerusalem and borders and security and water and everything else, or they don't agree on anything. So for 25 years, as we've seen, there's been an inability, and without going into a blame game, both sides have failed to agree on all of the on the 5 final status issues, and therefore, as a result, even though water, certainly for the last 6-7 years, has been the low-hanging fruit and can be solved and can improve the reality on the ground and help build trust, it hasn't moved forward because our own governments and the international community have stayed put to this all or nothing approach. And therefore, my final comment would be, it's no surprise that both of our peoples have no faith that peace will ever break out, because for the last 25 years, the all or nothing approach has left us with nothing. And therefore, as part of Ecopeace's call, we think it's time to change the paradigm, that water is the low-hanging fruit. Let's solve what's solvable today, not because we don't want to solve everything else, we do, but as we can see, there's such a terrible lack of trust and faith in a shared future that perhaps that can be built first and foremost on sharing our natural waters in a manner that improves the reality on the ground. So back to you, Rabbi Gad.
Okay, thank you so much, Gidon and Nada. I think what resonated with me the first time we met was very much this idea of let's work on things we can work on and build trust. This idea of all or nothing is just never going to work, doesn't work in any context. Why should it work here? But one thing that I remember you talking about, and maybe you could elaborate on it, because when we talk about sharing water, let's talk about it in a very positive thing. So Israel, who let's say is the most dominant force in the area, is the one who's saying you can, you can't, and sort of is in charge, and they're like, unless you're going to compromise with us, we won't give you water and the like. But talk about the other side of it, which we talked about sewage, which it's in Israel's interests to work on ecological solutions, especially in Gaza. Because if it doesn't, the ramifications for Israel. So perhaps you just, I remember that resonated a lot with me. So perhaps you can just open up that a bit.
So maybe I'll start with the Israeli side, and then Nada can continue with the Palestinian perspective. So as part of the work of Ecopeace, the World Bank actually approached us and asked us whether we had ideas of how to move forward the building of a sewage treatment plant in northern Gaza. For over 10 years, the international community, the World Bank, and the Palestinian Water Authority were trying to build a sewage treatment plant to treat the sewage of Gaza that was otherwise both polluting their own groundwater and being emitted into the Mediterranean and polluting the sea, both their own beaches and Israeli beaches. And one of the reasons, one of the impediments was that cement was identified as a dual-use item because Hamas was stealing cement to build tunnels, and therefore the Israeli military heavily controlled and limited the amount of cement coming into Gaza. And without cement, you can't build a sewage treatment plant. So at Ecopeace, we tried to broaden the thinking, like try to change the paradigm. So the paradigm here is, you can think of narrow military security and really follow every grain of cement, but then you're still left with raw sewage flowing into the shared environment and producing other risks that are perhaps as dangerous as tunnels. And that's the possibility of pandemic disease. We speak about COVID today, but Ecopeace was speaking 5-6 years ago already about the possibility of pandemic disease breaking out in Gaza because of the water and sanitation crisis that 2 million people were living under, with sewage not being treated, and with their drinking water not being potable, and that these pandemic diseases, of course, would not stop at the border. At Ecopeace, we started testing the beaches north of Gaza on Zikim Beach, a kilometer north of Gaza in Israel. We were fortunate in that when we came back with the test from the laboratory said, thank goodness we haven't found cholera, because we were looking for cholera. If people are drinking unhealthy water, that's what you can expect. But do you know that the desalination plant of Ashkelon, Israel's desalination plant in Ashkelon, is closed? And we didn't know because it was kept as a secret. It wasn't comfortable for decision makers because Israel had disengaged from Gaza, and the view was that, well, it's now Gaza's problem, and they're going to have to, with Hamas in power, solve their own issues. But the environment, of course, doesn't speak in such a fashion. The environment doesn't know borders, and what we're able to later show through satellite imagery that was also released was that Israel's southern desalination plant in Ashkelon, which on its own supplies 15% of the country's drinking water, was being intermittently closed because the sewage of Gaza was being carried up the Mediterranean coast and contaminating the input of where the desalination plant would draw water. And by highlighting that we can't disengage from a shared environment, not by playing a blame game, but by showing the cost through the Israeli media, through letters to the Israeli Prime Minister and Minister of Defense, getting the Israeli mayors around Gaza to come out in a letter again to the Prime Minister to say that we Israeli mayors have been in the front line of rockets, of tunnels. Don't put us on the front line also of pandemic disease. And that changed the policy. And Israel started to allow cement to flow in to Gaza. And today there's not only one modern sewage treatment plant built. Today there's 3 modern sewage treatment plants in operation. Nada can expand. But my final point is that we were able to broaden the understanding from a limited military security perspective to a broader human security perspective that takes many other factors into account of equal joint concern and common interest. And Nada, if you wanted to expand there.
I could probably give another example, which we have for long we've worked on in the past, and at the moment we are also continuing to work in this location. We have a very good success story in terms of stopping the separation wall in Batir, which was about to be built on the World Heritage Site of UNESCO. Batir, for those who don't know the region, it's located in Bethlehem Governorate in the West Bank, and it's known for its ancient terraces dating back to 4,000, 5,000 years back. And it is surrounded by springs down the valley, which has supported agricultural development all these years. The wall was supposed to be built by the Ministry of Defense in Israel exactly around the location of the World Heritage Site in 2014. During that year, we've mobilized our communities, both from the Palestinian side and also from the Israeli side in proper Israel to stop the building of the wall. We have engaged the several stakeholders, including the Ministry of Tourism, the municipalities, the Ministry of Environment in Israel, all to basically file a lawsuit in the court to basically defend the World Heritage Site from building the separation wall, both on the basis of its historical and archaeological importance, but also for its environmental importance, because this location basically hosts an ecological wonder that is not of the Palestinian interest alone, but also for the entire world. So we've also seen a lot of engagement from Israeli communities and also Israeli institutions working hand in hand with the Palestinian side to stop building the wall. And it in fact is the only site in the entire West Bank where the wall has not been constructed. Not even a fence was put there. After all this success, we've years have passed, but we're now facing another threat against the same location of the World Heritage Site of Batir. We're also, again, the terraces and the buffer zone and of the site and the springs that are being fed by the water recharge from the hills of Batir will be endangered by the expansion of a settlement in that area with an industrial zone being planned exactly on that location. In that sense, we are also working hand in hand with Palestinian and Israeli communities, lawyers and stakeholders to basically stop the expansion of the settlement and the environmental damage and the archaeological damage that will happen to this location. So as you can see, when it comes to sensitive issues, when it comes to shared interests, everybody gets on board in order to contribute with whatever resources and with whatever efforts that are required in order to counter any damages that are potential for these resources.
If I can jump in, Nada, with a couple of questions. The first one is a meta question dealing with around the world in developed Western countries in particular. You see young people, their passion is climate change and, being out there to talk about, the extinction revolution and those kinds of things. In the Palestinian population, given that first and foremost, the occupation has to be there, is there actually space in young people's heads to think about environmental degradation and the importance of climate change, that this ends up being a motivating factor to actually work with Israelis because of this bigger meta issue of the climate? That's part one. And part two, does the potential annexation, and this is coming from a whole bunch of people in the chat room there, is that actually putting all these efforts at risk and undermining cooperation even as we speak?
Thank you for the questions. For the first question, I would say, unfortunately, hardly. At the time being, for the Palestinian young generation, the one and foremost important thing is to live day by day, to battle with the economic situation that is deteriorating, to battle with the unclear future of any stability or prospects, to battle with the day-to-day difficulties that are imposed on the ground, whether it's the freedom of movement, whether it's the ability to start a living, to start a business, to be entrepreneurial. All these issues take a lot of space of the young Palestinian mind, that there's very little left to discuss climate change. It is very unfortunate that the first thing to blame is the occupation when it comes to difficulties, particularly when it comes to development of resources. For farmers or for young generations who are thinking of entrepreneurial projects, for instance, to develop land, to develop businesses, the first thing they encounter is the shortage of resources, whether it be water, whether it be the high prices of electricity, etc., etc. Marketing processes of their products, all these issues that come first to their minds, and the first to blame is not climate change. Unfortunately, the first to blame is occupation. However, it's not being understandable yet that a combination of both climate change and restrictions, when mixed together, it's not a very pleasant blend. And balancing both ideas of combating climate change, or at least, because we are also not a developed nation that contributes to climate change per se, we are a developing nation where our contribution to greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide is very minimal compared to other countries. We still do not have also the appropriate tools and mechanisms to adapt and to find solutions for adaptation to climate change impact. Pretty much because first of all, there are no policy or regulatory frameworks or supporting tools to do so on the ground by the government, because there are also other priorities to look at. And second, because again of lack of resources and restrictions. In that sense, for a young Palestinian to delve deep into these issues, it takes a lot of effort, and unless you are very, very passionate about this, you would find very little people really looking into this. About the second question and the annexation, absolutely, there's a lost opportunity here. When we look back, at least from my side, when we look back at 2015 and all these past couple of years where there was an opportunity to move forward on a regional trust fund to develop the Jordan Valley from Palestine, Israel, and Jordan, where there was an opportunity also to instill that the 1967 borders is the framework of this development, we potentially have lost an opportunity back then to instill this idea. But unfortunately, there was a lot of resistance from our governments to move forward on this endeavor. Unfortunately, now we are at the time of annexation, and hopefully now that we're listening to the news and keeping an eye on the latest political developments, we are not seeing perhaps an annexation of the Jordan Valley itself, but potentially we're looking at annexing large settlement blocks or areas that are adjacent to the separation wall. In any case, annexation is particularly an impeding process that would definitely also make us lose further opportunities for cooperation, whether it be the full Jordan Valley or parts of the West Bank, not only on the side of the Palestinian-Israeli relations, but also on the side of the Jordanian, also Israeli relations. Moving forward with these steps, first of all, we have seen some repercussions on the Palestinian Authority stopping or halting the working under the signed bilateral agreements between Palestine and Israel, which means cooperation or joint meetings between Palestinian and Israeli technical groups and committees on water, on electricity, on workers, etc., etc. All these issues have been put to a stop and a halt. The economic also arrangements that are under the Paris agreement between Israel and Palestine have also stopped, and it's making it even very difficult to deal with financial issues, with economic issues, etc. We are seeing at this stage the repercussions of stopping cooperation on the short-term level. So imagining that stopping cooperation to deal with strategic issues relating to climate change, relating to sustainable development, relating to a sustainable management of water resources, all these issues on a strategic level, I think are going to be impeded drastically by annexation, let alone also the potential damage of relations between Jordan and Israel, which maybe Gidon can speak more about it, but this is taking us down the road of chaos and insecurity in the region.
Thank you.
So maybe I'll take on, building on what Nada just said, I'll take on some of the questions that have appeared in the chat box. And thank you for all the questions and an incredible amount of participants here today. So, indeed, there is a need, of course, to focus beyond Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and we would like to see an expansion of this type of work that would one day include Lebanon and Syria. And in the first 4 years of the organization, we also worked in Egypt, but the Mubarak government actually closed their offices in Cairo because Greenies talking together was somehow a threat to national security in Egypt. But there's no question that the issues that the region faces are truly regional on the climate security approach, on the water security, on the energy security paradigm. And the only way to solve these issues is indeed to advance a regional dialogue. So the Water Energy Nexus project that Nada spoke about of large-scale desalination on the Mediterranean coast and large-scale solar production in the desert hinterland of Jordan and then the exchange is the type of healthy interdependencies. And one of the questions here of David as to so what's holding us back is the fear of being dependent on one another. So Jordanians are fearful of being more dependent on buying water from Israel, given that they're already buying natural gas, and as part of the peace treaty, some of their water is allocated from Israel. There's a fear on the Israeli side to be dependent on electricity that would come from across the border from Jordan. But we think that the experience of Europe in the creation of the coal and steel arrangement, which was the two most important natural resources of that continent last century, and the interdependence that created, is a great model for the Levant, but not on coal and steel, but on the two critical natural resources of harnessing the sun and the sea, which are pertinent to this century, and helping to create sort of climate security for all of our region. So, the challenge that we always face is that we need to highlight that there is a risk of moving forward in cooperation, but there's a greater risk of maintaining the status quo, or of even going backwards, such as unilateral actions such as annexation express. And when we look at the failure of Syria and its the uprising and the tragedy to millions of Syrians, including the millions of Syrian refugees that today live in Jordan, well, we again need to bring home the message that everything's interconnected, that when a neighbor fails, it has direct impact on the other countries in that neighborhood. And if we're going to enable the region as a whole to withstand the tremendous pressure that the climate crisis presents, then we need cooperation more than ever. And unilateral actions such as annexation defeat the willingness to promote that type of cooperation. And that's a very much part of our message, which is coming, I think, from the more positive side of looking, how much we have to gain, how much cooperation is in the shared interest of us all, and let's continue to maintain the ability to advance that cooperation for our own self-interest and mutual gains.
You referred to something there, and it also comes back to something Nada mentioned about facts on the ground a little bit. And it's referring to Cherie's question there. So any of us who've been traveling through areas A, B, C, you can see kind of like water distribution to the areas A and B, the Palestinian areas, compared to the settler areas in Area C. Pools and greenery compared to very tiny rooftop water tanks. So given that there's just that general visible inequity of water distribution, how are you able to get Palestinians engaged in Ecopeace without being accused of normalization?
Yes, thank you for the question. It is absolutely not as easy as we speak when we speak about cooperation and encouraging young people and students and teachers and to engage with us. But as I mentioned earlier, first of all, we focus on these differences, and we focus on these inequalities. We focus on the problems and how they can be resolved. We address that the shortages of resources and lack of equal opportunities are impeding the day-to-day life of the Palestinians. We try to address these difficulties, and we try to get personal with these people. in terms of how they feel, and we let them let go of their feelings and to vent and etc. But when we think of solutions, we try to focus first of all on, as I mentioned, on the self-interest and how do we get ourselves strong together in order to overcome these difficulties. When we speak to our partners and with our potential participants, we also highlight the beliefs or the general framework of Ecopeace in terms of our belief and insisting to work together towards a two-state solution where two states can live side by side in peace and prosperity and harmony and equal opportunities. We focus on the mainstream, let's say, elements which even are acceptable among the mainstream population in terms of East Jerusalem as the capital, not working with settlements, rights for water and for everyone. These elements, which are mainstream for each and every Palestinian, we try to highlight them and we try to explain that regardless of the situation now on the ground, we are doing our best with our partners in Jordan and in Israel to instill these mainstream concepts towards a peaceful coexistence and equal opportunities. We also start working with them step by step, because when they see the impact that we do on the ground in terms of successes here and there, be it the Gaza wastewater treatment plan advancement, being the stopping of the wall, being some also development projects on the ground here and there, also changing and developing the perspectives and widening the perspectives of young people on all possibilities and what can be possible and what can be done, uplifting the spirits of despair and depression into spirits of young people who are willing to become agents of change. We see these little changes in our summer camps and work with the youth, and we hear from their parents. We get fantastic testimonies from their parents on the change of their behavior, the deepening their interests in things that are not of their age. They've grown, they've matured, they've become more understanding to their realities and how to tackle them and how to speak about them. Even when it comes to the ability of a young Palestinian to speak to a young Israeli, to say, this is the price of occupation. I live just across the border, a few miles away from your house, but my reality is different. This is a message that we always are keen to also to emphasize when we approach our communities to collaborate with us and to be part of our movement. It is not merely an issue of just cooperation. It is an issue of spreading a message, building capacities, developing things on the ground. And this is what keeps us going, in fact.
I mean, if I could add to that, Jeffrey, I think that what's unique about our approach is that we're able to speak to the self-interest of each side, so that, you know, in the Palestinian side, it's about obtaining water rights. On the Israeli side, it's about security, and it's about, you know, water security issues. On the Jordanian side, it's about development and the need to pull themselves out of terrible poverty. And what we show in our work is that all three of those objectives can only be obtained or best obtained through cooperation, that we can all benefit by moving forward together. And although we don't the environment is not the number one issue in our region, it is a growing issue, and we do have an Israeli Greta, a Palestinian Greta Thunberg, a Jordanian Greta, and would love to have the opportunity to maybe bring 3 young people to Australia, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli together, or perhaps 3 mayors. We're able to bring the mayors of the Jordan River, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli, to literally jump into the river together, not out of best friends, but out of a common understanding that the only way to get that sewage out and to fairly allocate the water, it's going to require cooperation. So we're looking for opportunities. I think Australia and the region share this common concern. Australia is predominantly also a semi-arid desert, and climate change is hitting Australia certainly as hard as it's hitting the Middle East. We think that our issues really do speak to an Australian audience, and we look forward to the opportunity of further deepening potential for cooperation with Australia, the Australian Jewish community, but also the broader Australian community as a whole.
Well, Gidon, Nada, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from you again. I think this is the 3rd time I heard you at Parliament House. I think it was last year or the year before as well. If people want to support you, what can they do to support you?
So would very much welcome if anyone's able to donate. I mean, we're a non-profit. We're completely dependent on donations. You can go onto our website and press the donate button, and there's various ways that you can donate. You can subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out in English through the website every month. You can like us on our Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn pages, so that you can be constantly informed. A great way to support our efforts beyond financial, or in addition to financial, is sharing the message, because our voice is not sufficiently heard. So helping us share the different messages through social media, through contact, through op-eds in newspapers, that all goes a tremendous way. And then, of course, coming back for those that have specific ideas, to brainstorm with us as to how they could be helpful in introducing us to other like-minded people, or other ideas that people in the audience might have as to how we can build relationships. Peace building, environmental peace building is in the end all related to relationship building, and we look forward to the opportunity to further delve and invest in that relationship with the 80-odd people that joined us in this last hour.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Nada, to Gidon, and to Ecopeace. Please touch base with them. I'm sure through the website, through Facebook, you'll be able to contact them quite easily. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please join us again next week for our 3rd in the series, Peace is Possible, with Roots, which is a unique organization that is bringing together settlers and Palestinians to talk initiatives of peace. It's really going to be fantastic. Gidon, Nada, thank you so much. Everybody should have a wonderful week, and we look forward to, please God, seeing you again. And Gidon, we look forward to doing more of these in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank you very, very much.
Nada.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Shabbat tov. Bye.